This is Jeffrey Tucker, Brownstone Institute. I'm very pleased today to have a discussion with a very prominent scholar and priest, Father Robert Sirico, and we're going to be speaking about this very interesting encyclical that's come out from Pope Leo called Magnifica Humanitas. And it issues a grave warning against AI, artificial intelligence, and its implications for the dignity of the human person and its uniqueness. Now, I will say this. Having lived through what seems like several big technological revolutions, they were mostly greeted with a great deal of excitement. This artificial intelligence issue, though, is something else entirely. We've seen how speakers at commencement addresses are being booed when they bring up AI and its transformative effects on the workplace. Why is this? Because they worry about their jobs, maybe. I've wondered if when you're in college today, you're a chump if you spend time writing a paper and all your friends are getting A's because they're having the latest AI engine crank out, a perfect term paper that can't be traced back to AI. There's a lot of annoyances associated with this and a generalized anxiety. And it's not just about the data centers that are themselves using eminent domain to essentially take large swaths of land by state force and turning them into these playgrounds for technocratic elites. It's not just that, although that's a factor. It's just a general sense that something is different about this revolution than the Industrial Revolution or the initial waves of the digital revolution. And it very well could be that the Pope in this encyclical has identified that. I've not read the encyclical. It's 45,000 words, and I did not want to ask AI to give me a quick summary of it. My plan is to actually sit down and read the whole thing. But before I do that, I thought, well, this is an opportunity to talk to a genuine expert on papal encyclicals, on the social teaching of the church, and also on the complex relationship between the technological revolutions, economic prosperity, and the dignity of the human person. So I'm very pleased to introduce to you Father Robert Sirico, founder of the Acton Institute.
Thank you, Jeff. Good to be with you.
Well, it's wonderful to see you. Now, you have written already an opinion piece for the Wall Street Journal. You can summarize that, but maybe just give me your first reaction to the encyclical. Are you happy that it exists? Is what maybe one way to start.
Yes, I am. I don't think it is the final word on this. Obviously, I think it is the opening salvo. But yes, I am happy. I'm happy by the trajectory I see it setting up. I am happy that it's gone to the root of the question. Let me say very clearly, even though a lot of the media coverage of it has to do with AI, fundamentally, this encyclical is not about AI. Fundamentally, this is about the human person. It is not about artificial intelligence. It's about human intelligence, or more specifically, about human dignity and who the human person is. And I think any serious consideration of what AI is from any perspective is, or almost any perspective, is going to be about how does this serve the human community? I think that's the fear of the students that you described at their commencements. What is this going to do to me? How does this apply to me? And I think what the Pope does, as he should do, because he's not a policy wonk, he's not the head of a think tank or a lobbyist. He sees himself as the pastor of the universal church and the inheritor a great reservoir of information on human beings in varied circumstances. I don't think there's any single institution on the planet that can boast to having engaged more people in under more circumstances in various epochs than the Roman Catholic Church, regardless of whether one believes in its doctrines, etc. And that's another point that I like about this encyclical. For those who are not Catholics, I think this will be an opportunity for engagement with some ideas that where we would have mutual concerns.
So AI is only one of multifarious sort of threats to the very idea of the what makes us distinctly human. And, you know, I could tick through a list myself. It seems like transhumanist ideology is everywhere.
Exactly.
We have attempts to sort of biological merging of machines and people. I mean, this is not a conspiracy theory. I mean, it's everywhere. And also a sort of new, what would you call it, like immortalism that seems to be spreading among certain classes of people that imagine just if they find the right combination of drugs or the right whatever.
Replacement parts.
Replacement parts, right. That there's a...
But you see, all of this that you've just described, even from that, you know, extreme technological vision, assumes certain things about who human beings are. And that is what the Pope is countering here, that we are not, what is the phrase, meat bags? Is that what they call just flesh, that we're just
biological units, just biological units, an extension, just mammals, just another iteration of the same thing you find elsewhere.
Yeah, no, we are beings who precisely discover ourselves in our limitation, in our mortality, that we transcend our physicality by our sense of moral conscience, our capacity to love and adore, our capacity to sacrifice for others, our generosity. And that is what the transhumanist thing is trying to say is irrelevant and not intrinsic to the human person. It really is intrinsic. Is that what's ironic about it is that what makes this challenge possible is precisely human transcendence. I mean, you wouldn't have AI if you didn't have human beings. And now the question is whether they're going to replace us or not.
Okay, so it seems like an unusual sort of challenge, but and maybe it should be obvious to us, but maybe it's not. What is distinct about the human person from everything else? And you've already ticked off a list. One of the words that come to my own mind is creativity.
Well, yes. Now, I think that AI, or the advocates of this more extreme version of AI, would say, well, this mechanism can be creative, but really all it does is put in front of us information. It can synthesize that information in a certain sense, but it cannot help us to apprehend wisdom. It cannot experience anything. It cannot experience joy and beauty, and the application of the data. I'm old enough to remember Dragnet on television. I don't know. Well, you're a historian, you would know Dragnet. But Sergeant Friday would come upon a crime scene, and inevitably there would be someone there who had witnessed it, would be very nervous and want to tell them about everything. And Sergeant Friday would always say, "The facts, ma'am, just the facts." And that's what we have in AI. That's what we have in Google. We have the facts, but do we have the meaning of the facts? And I think the thing that satisfies the human, because there is something that exceeds the facts in us, is we want to know why. What we want to know wisdom. And that's not what AI can either experience or give. It can mimic it, and it can seduce us into thinking that. And that's what we've seen happen, very often in counseling sessions with AIs. Oh, yes, well, you could commit suicide, yes, and this is how you would do it. And this is would you want me to write your note for you?
Yeah.
Your suicide note?
Father, one of the thing I first noticed from these LLM AI engines, and it just like immediately, and it started making me suspicious, is its persistent sycophancy. It adores you. I mean, it's flattering you, just constantly. For example, early on, I used to write an essay and then ask Grok, what do you think about this? And Grok just my biggest fan. I mean, everything, unbelievable. Yeah, while urging me to cut off some of the sharper edges, maybe moderate my opinions a little bit here, make it a little more mainstream, don't alienate readers with this or this. And so I began to realize that I was being sort of lured into this sort of trap,
That's interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah,
that the people who be susceptible to this are either people without a sense of esteem themselves or narcissists.
Well, you think about it this way: like you're at a dinner party. I mean, who's the most popular guest? I mean, it's the guy who's listening to everybody all the time and saying, that is really true. I hadn't thought of it that way. That's excellent. Right? That's sort of how to win friends and influence me. But this
exactly.
This is what AI does to you, just all the time, and in a way makes you less critically minded towards what it's saying, because it's slathering you with this sort of praise. Now, this is just the LLMs. Of course, there are a million great, even just thrilling uses of AI that all speak to this issue of there's certain routines you have to do that it's vastly better at doing than we are ourselves. And
yes,
but it's so what is the objective of laying out the meaning of and the distinct magnificence of the human person relative to everything else, in light of this ongoing, sometimes very terrifying technological revolutions that we're living in right now? What is the objective here? Is it
before I address the question of the objective, let me just pause for a moment and ask us to linger for a moment on the horror of having to talk about the magnificence of humanity. I mean, that used to be just an assumption. How do we treat animals? How do we treat pets? We hopefully treat them in a humane manner. That is up to the standards of humanity, not because they are human, but because we are human. And we are living in a world right now that doesn't know itself. People don't know who they are. You ask them who they are, and they don't know. They don't understand the full depth of who they are, and there are moral and practical consequences to that lack of anthropological insight, to our own human dignity. When a person understands, it's really interesting, because this is not something that the elites know. In fact, the elites may be anesthetized to it in some sense. But I remember growing up in Brooklyn, New York, poor families. Your Jewish mother or your Italian mother, your black mother would say to a kid, you remember your dignity. You're part of this family. When you go out there, you're representing all of us. And this was designed to ennoble the child, to carry oneself through the world with a sense of purpose and if I might use the philosophical term, a telos, an end to which we are drawn. And that we have to do this, to come now to the question of the objective of doing this. In this particular world, the objective is to distinguish and enable us, because what the Pope is not doing here is he is not either a troglodyte or a transhumanist. He's trying to say this is a very sophisticated and useful tool in the right hands with the right understanding of who we are. But if we come to it and ask it to be us, or for us to be it, to dominate us, to control us, then we have a dangerous situation in the world. And the danger of that situation is not just seen, psychologically or spiritually. It can be seen in terms of warfare. I mean, there's a real severe warning in this encyclical about allowing algorithms to make determinations about the use of violence in warfare, so that now this isn't a human being, a conscience, person with a responsibility who's making the decision about this or that tactical move. It's now an algorithm that's been encoded in the machine.
And that warning would also pertains to just everyday life too. You don't really want to be in a situation where when you're navigating your place in the world, whether it's getting airline tickets or making decisions about traffic or consumer goods or just normal decision making in life, where there's not some actual decider like a volitional mind on the other end, but rather you're on all sides confronted by machines in every direction.
We're all confronted with this frustration. I tend to fly Delta Airlines a lot. And if I have to talk to their chat box one more time, and it can't answer my questions, doesn't even understand my question. I mean, we've all experienced that frustration of dealing with, it's not even dealing with a person on the other side of the world who has a heavy accent that we don't understand. This is a challenge of communication. With the chat box, it's not a challenge of communication. The thing is more intelligent than you, has more information at its disposal than you. But the frustration is that you're dealing with another reality, a true alien.
Yeah. Can you, you've described this forgetting the magnificence of the human person as somewhat distinct in our times, and maybe perhaps in our lifetimes. But now I read that Pope Leo begins, or at least alludes to this in the encyclical, something concerning the Tower of Babel. And I have to ask you, Father, I'm not sure I really understand that story, where it came from, what that thing was about, and what happened. Can you review this for us?
Sure. So it's a story in the book of Genesis about humanity coming to a certain point with all of its varied languages, different people collaborating together to build this tower to heaven, to God, to become God, to take over heaven. In essence, it's represented in the book of Genesis as this story of arrogance, of human arrogance and pride. And God confounds the languages. If you were a fundamentalist, you would say this is the origin of the varied languages. But he confounds them so that they can't collaborate in the production of this. And Babel, we even still retain the idiom in our language now, in the English language, babbling, making noises but not making sense. And that is what he juxtaposes with another instance of human collaboration. And this was after the destruction of Jerusalem the rebuilding of Jerusalem and the collaborative effort that it took to do something positive and constructive and purposeful. So he has these two metaphors, the Tower of Babel and the reconstruction of Jerusalem. And he begins with that whole juxtaposition, and he's offering the model of the construction of the walls of the city of Jerusalem as the model for coherent human collaboration.
So, what was the error of the people that were building this large thing? It wasn't just that they were. It wasn't just that it was too tall, or that it was reaching.
It was what it represented. It was their arrogance that they thought on their own they could achieve divinity, and that's kind of what at least some people see to be the case with AI. I mean, the whole notion of transhumanism, that somehow you can embed yourself in the machine, that the machine will overtake you. I mean, the trajectory that it sets up with this assumption that all weakness needs to be eliminated by a technological algorithm is the arrogance that you're going to somehow. And some people explicitly talk about finding God in this. Just a New York Times article interviewed somebody from Silicon Valley who was not surprisingly, dismissive of this effort of the Pope, and it talks about this search for God or seeing God in AI.
Yeah.
Omniscience, omnipresence.
Yeah, or the idea that we can ever invent anything that will make us superfluous.
Yeah.
That will really sort of render us, rightly inert. Just reduce the human person to a pure spectator role, just observing the robots building the world, a more and more beautiful world while we live off, a taxpayer-funded basic income. That kind of vision,
yeah.
Right? Which I mean, Elon Musk, for all of his merits and all of his genius and all of his opinions with which I agree, actually tweeted out that he saw this as a kind of future, which I think was just a grave mistake on his part. But
yeah, I agree, and I agree with you. Musk has such insight. I mean, of all public figures, he has a great understanding, especially of the economic reality. But I think in following the trajectory of that logic, he ends up with that. I think he needs a richer anthropological understanding, even though he has that. His view of children and having children and the beauty of that is so edifying. So I think there's a contradiction there, and I think he's smart enough to find some way to resolve it.
Yeah. Okay. Just to step into a slightly different aspect of the implications of this encyclical. I've read in the Wall Street Journal they were really going after the Pope for what they perceived to be his statism, for lack of a better term. So here you have a thinker who's kind of casting some degree of aspersions on some aspects of technological innovation, and then looking to the government to do something about it in the Wall Street Journal, and it's predictable, somewhat ham-handed way. It says, leave AI alone. We don't want the government as part of it. But is that really a part of what the Pope is pushing here?
I don't think that's a careful reading of the document, and I mean, it is 45,000 words, as you say, and I just don't think they read it very carefully, because what he begins with and does in a beautiful way Uh, and maybe you have to have a deep appreciation, understanding of Catholic social thinking. He lifts up the principle of subsidiarity. Now, let me just give a little contextual for your viewers, your audience may not appreciate the nuances of this. And I get that, because I live in this world. Like the way you talk about tech, I have to sit and listen very carefully, and maybe the way I talk about Catholic social teaching, people have to sit and take it in a little bit. This principle of subsidiarity says that human needs, are met at the most local level of their existence, but that there is an understanding that you can go up to higher levels of social organization in order to meet those needs. So if I'm sick, I don't take care of myself, but maybe my spouse or my family does. And if there's a collapse there, then you go up to the next level and the next level. And because the Pope is not an anarchist, he believes that the government has a role, but it is not the dominant role, it is not the permanent role, and it is not the normative role. And that the state should act as to ensure that all of these factors of society, all of these various levels of society, whether they are businesses or churches or fraternities or municipalities, are functioning in such a healthy way that they are participants in the whole thing. So to say that the government is the guarantor or the animator of these various sections, that's what subsidiarity means. It means help. It is not the one world government, is not the Communist Party, the Politburo that's going to run the entire show. And then he says that this needs to be linked to another principle of Catholic social teaching, and that is solidarity. Solidarity, which is a word that has been used by the left very often to mean kind of comrade in arms against the elite and the bourgeois and the capitalists. But solidarity really means the recognition of myself in the other. It is empathy. It is a recognition that human vulnerability in other people has a call on my conscience. And he says these need to be linked because one without the other devolves into a kind of welfarism without responsibility. I'm quoting the Encyclical now. And that's pretty strong language for the progressives to hear.
Yep.
And solidarity without subsidiarity becomes a mere political manipulation in society. But if you have these both things together, you have a greater assurance that there's going to be a wider, now I use switch to Adam Smith, a wider distribution of labor. That is, if you recognize the market, and I think this is a defect of the Encyclical, I think it could have said more on this subject, because in rightfully critiquing the idol of efficiency, I think the Pope may lose sight that the market's efficiency need not become a new anthropology. It can be seen as a way of incorporating intelligence that exists in the market and that is communicated through prices and entrepreneurial activity. The assumption seems to be in one place in this encyclical, I think it's about paragraph 158, that that economic models of efficiency become the end, the be-all and end-all, a new anthropology. But I think we have to have a respect for the entrepreneurial capacity for efficiency, because in one sense, efficiency is simply the accomplishment of what you set out to do. It is the curtailing of loss, basically. And if you don't appreciate that, or if you see that as the dominant replacement for human beings, then I can see why you can be nervous about that. But if you neglect it, then you kind of assuming that entrepreneurs come to the market with an idea fully formed. And they don't. They rarely do. Maybe, I think most entrepreneurs have gone through various iterations of their product and constantly doing studies to see what is the market going to bear. And all of that is a way of serving other people. It's a way to learn how to serve other people. And the Pope doesn't talk about profits here very much, but that's what a profit is. You get an indication that what you've done is of benefit to human beings. And I think more could have been said. The Pope does say that entrepreneurship can be a calling, can be a vocation, which is great in a
he says that in this encyclical.
Yes, I can get the actual quote for you. May take me a while with the 250 paragraphs.
The one thing, Father, I would say about this, sometimes I think, in the circles of the Wall Street Journal and so on, that they're overly sensitive to these kinds of criticisms of the limits of a pure materialist means, right? I mean, this seems to be the essence of what the Pope's saying. There are limits to what technology we can expect technology to achieve, right? I mean, and putting all of our hopes in science is dangerous because you threaten to weaken the human spirit and the creative spirit and the use of courage and empathy and love and there's nothing wrong with a pastor pointing this out and you and I were discussing earlier that there's this brutal passage in Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, where he's saying that the potential problem with a forever expansion of the division of labor with specialization that if your life becomes just nothing but a routine as part of a single industrial machine, that it can rob you of your volition, of your inspiration, of creativity, of courage, which kind of guts the thing that makes us most human. So, I mean, that's a really interesting comment from Adam Smith. That doesn't make him anti-market. On the contrary, he loves markets. He loves the division. But he's just warning that whatever economic processes you're undertaking do have implications for the very idea of what it means to be a human, and we should consider that.
Yeah, I think when people develop expertise in various areas, the Pope in theology and the Wall Street Journal in economics, they sometimes can miss the insight of the other. And I think a dialogue is needed. I've been working for almost 40 years now through the work of the Acton Institute to promote this kind of dialogue, because very often the vocabulary is such. And maybe the Wall Street Journal's acceptance of my op-ed on their own editorial page is an indication of trying to do something like that.
Yeah. Well, I've been feeling this. I'm sure many people have, and this is why I think this encyclical is well timed. I've been feeling now for some years, really, since the onset of the COVID crisis, more than anything else, that the idea of being human seems uniquely under threat in our times. I'm looking forward to reading this, and it seems like the Pope does have a rather unique platform, to speak to urgent needs, and you feel as if this encyclical does say something urgently needed, right when it's needed most.
I think both what he says in framing the debate about humanity, the magnificence of the human person, and his willingness to engage the technological question, these new innovative things, and the tradition that he bears in his person really gives us an opportunity to reflect on things in a more holistic way. And I think that's exactly what's needed now. If we get too narrow, then we miss out on some real fundamental insights. My and this may take us in a whole different direction, but I wonder if the solution to this whole thing, that is this reconciliation, is competing AIs. That, in other words, the Pope's concern about AI is of a particular kind of AI inspired by a diminished and anemic anthropology that just sees efficiency and pleasure and all of that as the goal, which diminishes human life. It diminishes the dignity of people, even who are in pain and suffering and limitation, all of that. What if we had an AI that approached the whole question of humanity from the perspective of the dignity of the human person? What kind of medical treatments would we be recommending? Would it just be, well, you need this compound and this technique to solve this cancer? Or would it be a technique that involves human care and concern in addition to all of the rest of that? And we know, even if we don't know why these things happen, we know that human bonding and human love and affection and attention can also accelerate physical human well-being. I mean, babies die when they are not cuddled and loved. And that tells us something about who we are.
Well, we are in the very early stages of this, and I agree with your intuition there, and I think it might be consistent with what the Pope's saying, that this might be the worst time to adopt something like a central plan for what AI should be, and that we're going to have to iterate here, and hopefully in a competitive environment. And so far, that does seem to be the case. A consolidated, single, unified AI system, I think, would be catastrophic. Although I understand that every business wants to be number one, but in this case, we're better off with many, many different forms.
And I think there's enough indication in this encyclical that he's open to that. And this is the other thing that really enthuses me about it, is that he's open to engaging varying points of view. He invites this conversation to take place. And as you say, he has a great platform from which to do it.
Yeah. Well, Father, thank you so much for your lifetime work at the Acton Institute as a founder, as an author of many, many books. I so many wonderful books. Your book on the parables. I had some involvement in on the research side of that. You were
a great inspiration.
Well,
you kept prodding me along.
Well, it was a thrilling experience for me. So we've worked together for decades. It's such a pleasure, you and your realm, mine, and over at Brownstone to have this conversation with you today on this important encyclical.
Thank you so much, and thanks for your work. Thank you.
Thanks for being with us today, Father.